All right, Alexander, let's talk about once again what's happening in the U.S. The latest news, actually, that I saw on Zero Hedge was that they stormed Seattle's the mayor's office or city hall. Um, I don't know, BLM, Antifa, upset millennials. I don't even know anymore. The whole thing's protesters, whatever you want to call them. The whole thing's just become absolutely ridiculous. And from what I understand, the mayor in Seattle is very progressive as well, like uber progressive. But no police, no nothing. They just went in, they took it over. They have their list of demands, which is defund the police. Do it now. No money to cops, or else I guess they're going to rule over Seattle now. I mean, I don't know. Sometimes I think to myself, I really think Trump's going to win in November. And I think to myself, if Trump wins, or once the rallies get going and he starts building momentum and then he wins in November, all of this is going to calm down and the U.S. is going to get back on track and it's going to be the country that I remember it to be, before all of this erupted. But there's other times when I think, Alexander, that, going back and looking at history, looking at the YouTube videos where people are interviewing these protesters and hearing their answers to certain questions, whether they're in the U.S. or the U.K. or in Australia, like we had with our previous video. People are interviewing them, you hear their answers or the lack of ability to rationalize or express themselves as to why they're protesting or listening to other people's opinions or to see how triggered they are or how emotionally shut down they are. You start to think to yourself that even if Trump wins, this generation seems so out of tune, so out of sync with, what's happening on planet Earth. I mean, I don't have any other way to explain it. It seems like, they're just two different worlds, really two different worlds. That I asked the question to you is, are we seeing the inevitable just decline of the West, the inevitable decline of the West, given that this is the next generation?
Well, I'm going to have to say this. I mean, I started to have some of these same concerns during the Kavanaugh affair, when I found it was absolutely impossible to conduct a discussion with people about it, because they would take positions that they would not want to look to or discuss or think about. And I feel that something very similar is now happening in relation to this. It's become like a kind of morality play, if you like. I mean, I don't know quite what to describe it. It is not connected to the reality of the world in which we live anymore. I mean, Seattle, as you rightly say, is a very progressive place, progressive place. So what value is there in storming buildings there, pushing the mayor out aside? He's on your side, or at least he, in theory, is supposed to be on your side. I mean, defund the police. I mean, we discussed this in another video. I mean, take a step back and think that through. Think through about this actual incident that is the spark of all of this. Happened in Minneapolis, another very, very left-wing city. The local police there are controlled by the local government, so they're responsible for policing in Minneapolis. Not Donald Trump, not the Republicans, not the Conservatives, no one like this. So there's problems with the police force. It is the people in Minnesota, Minneapolis, who are in charge. So what do? You demand now complete defunding of the police force in Minnesota. You have a whole, decision passed by the council. Now, we discussed this in another video. That's not going to be implemented in the way that was said. But isn't it extraordinary that people even ask this? It's that the mayor of Minneapolis gets booed when he tries to point out this isn't actually a good idea. And now we have, as I said, protests in places like Seattle. It seems to me that, as I said, if we lose the ability to discuss things, to talk about things, to think things out, to look at the world as it really is, to try and analyze our problems, then frankly, I mean, that's the kind of situation, it seems to me, where a political crisis becomes completely intractable. And I'm afraid I agree. I think even if Donald Trump wins in November, and I've explained in many programs why that would be my preferred option. In fact, for me, it is the only option. I'm very much concerned that even if he wins in November, there is no real prospect of things getting any better. They can only get worse.
Yeah, I mean, it's really become what's going on right now. It really has become almost a cult-like religion, it seems. I mean, did you see the photos of Nancy Pelosi and and the Democrat House members kneeling down and, you know, wearing the I forgot what it's called, and the whole thing was absolutely absurd. It was, the pandering was ridiculous. But I mean, and it's not only an American thing. I was watching the Akkad Daily, Carl Benjamin, in his YouTube channel, and he's very much a libertarian. He lives in the UK, and he's a libertarian. I mean, he's very much. I think he describes himself. I don't want to speak for him, but I think he has described himself as a traditional liberal.
Yes.
But he was making the video was about I believe Yorkshire tea in the UK.
Yes.
Their company. Yeah, and he was making the point that that Yorkshire tea has now also bowed down to BLM, and you know they've taken a knee, and now they're talking a lot about, you know, the consequences of UK's imperialism and what it's done to the world.
Yes.
And how it's caused so much hurt and damage, and you know how we need to change, and we need to tear statues down and rethink, you know, the entire UK society. And he was making the point saying this is a tea company.
Well, quite.
What I mean, you pick it up from there. Because a logical person can understand the craziness of this all. He just sat there and he was saying, "You're a tea company. Look at your history."
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I drink their tea bags. I mean, we really have it seems completely bizarre. I mean, all right. I mean, there is a history with tea. I mean, you know, the tea was involved. It was one of the colonial products, and all sorts of terrible things were done and used to be done. But bear something in mind. Many of the people who are protesting so passionately and forcing companies like, you know, Yorkshire Tea, which isn't going to change the world, cannot change the world in any significant way, to sort of bow down and, you know, come and support these things. These people do not ultimately oppose so much of the violence that are, you know, Western societies are perpetrating everywhere. You know, we talked about Libya the other day. That's not what they're against. In fact, what they're against is there is a certain narrative of their own history, or at least not even a narrative, the record of their own history, which they want to change. And it's become, you know, it's out of control. You know, there is a very famous poem. I'm sure many of our viewers know it, and you know, it always gets trotted out in these situations. For that reason, I just generally avoid reciting it. But it's by Yeats, and it's called William Butler Yeats, and it's called The Second Coming. And it reads, the famous lines are: "Things fall apart, the center cannot hold, mere anarchy is loosed upon the world. The blood-dimmed tide is loosed, and everywhere the ceremony of innocence is drowned. The best lack all conviction, whilst the worst are full of passionate intensity." Look around us. Tell me that's not what we have at the moment.
China, Russia, we mentioned this in another video. Let's talk about China, because they're obviously the country that's on the ascent.
Yes.
If they're not the top dog at the moment. When they look at all of this going on, and China has its own problems, you know, we've documented what's happening in Hong Kong, but we've documented why China will handle what's going on in Hong Kong. We're not saying it's right or wrong, but we're saying they will handle it.
Absolutely.
They're looking at what's happening in the United States and, say, the UK and Australia and the Western architecture. And do you think they're saying to themselves, this is too easy?
Yeah, I'm sure they are.
These people won't be able to defend themselves.
That
I
is
mean, do you think that's
exactly
what they're saying? These people
that,
will not be able to defend themselves.
that is exactly what they're saying. They're saying to themselves, these are societies that are just out of control, where forces are being unleashed which are no longer capable of being contained, and where people, and this is perhaps even more important, are not responding rationally to their challenges. To be very clear, I am not someone who in any way denies that there are major structural issue problems in the United States, that there are problems of policing of the United States. I'm absolutely willing. I know for a fact that there is a million, problems of police brutality and police violence in many countries, and the United States is no exception. Is this the way to solve them? You can't even have a proper debate anymore. You can't even debate the fact that Chauvin and Floyd apparently did know each other. Apparently, it's now established that they did. That there were personal issues, between them that were long-standing. That Floyd has a record. We're not, people are not prepared to talk about that record, and that who knows, quite possibly, there is more to this particular incident than simple policing, out of control policing as it's been represented. In other words, there might be a personal dynamic involved. We're not allowed to talk about these things because that's not part of the narrative anymore. That is, if you start saying those, if you start bringing this up, you start talking about well-known Western concepts of investigation, looking at evidence, not rushing to conclusions, any of that kind of thing, you are somebody who becomes supposedly an apologist for police brutality, rather than somebody who is trying to analyze a situation, trying to deal with it, trying to find proper workable solutions to it. China, for all its, I'm not a supporter, I'm not a fan of that system at all. They have retained that skill of analysis and ability to make decisions. We seem to be losing it.
Yeah, but the other thing that, and you've been to China, but one thing that I noticed about China, and one thing that I definitely noticed about Russia, even though I don't think Russia is, actually I know Russia is not a direct competitor to the United States or China for that matter.
No.
That's obvious. But the one thing that you notice when you're in Russia or you've been to China or when you study China and what's going on is they're moving in a uniform direction.
Yes.
And when I mean they, I mean the government and the people. I mean,
yes.
They've got a goal and it's a medium to long-term goal and they're moving towards that.
Yes.
Where you're looking at the West right now and it's just freaking chaos.
Yes.
I mean, it's to the point where they can't even agree on simple, basic biological things. Viewers know what I'm talking about. They can't agree on environmental things, whether to use a straw or not. That's the big debate. Should I use a straw or not? They can't agree on simple things like you mentioned Kavanaugh and, whether a crime was committed 35 years ago with zero evidence, zero witnesses. The person who's assuming the crime doesn't even remember being there.
Yes.
They can't agree on that. They can't agree on whether the president of the United States is a puppet of Russia.
Yes.
They can't agree on whether a phone call between the president of the United States and the Ukraine president, even though you have the damn transcript in front of you, was a crime or not a crime. Yes. I mean, this is absolute madness. I've rattled off 4 or 5 points that we've seen in the last, 3 years, which scream madness.
Absolutely. Completely. I mean, I entirely agree. I mean, I have nothing to add to that except to say that this is right. And as I said, it's a flight from reality. There's no other way. There's no other way to describe it to my mind. But be very clear about this. And I come back to the United States, the West, has all the material resources, all the scientific and technical skills to sort out its problems. It can do it. I mean, there is no challenge from China or Russia or China and Russia together, which it can't absorb. It doesn't, I don't mean that it can control those countries or dominate them. I think that's past. But there is no reason to think that the Chinese or the Russians are going to come and dominate us unless We are unable to keep things together. I don't think Chinese want to do that, by the way. But, if there is going to be a fall of the West, it's going to be because of this, because we are no longer able to talk to each other, reason things out, look at problems, solve them rationally, understand basic facts, understand even what the facts are. You talked about Russiagate. I remember reading Christopher Steele's dossier and saying, how is it possible that this nonsense is being taken seriously? The United States, which I remember, would not have taken Christopher Steele's dossier seriously. It would have provoked derision the moment people saw it. The same goes for, the Ukraine gate, this telephone call between Zelensky and Trump. People would just say, what's there? There's nothing there. And yet we have the whole impeachment built around it. And the trouble is, it's, as you rightly say, it's not going to end in November. Whichever side wins, and I know which side I'm on in this, because and I'm perfectly aware of Donald Trump's many faults and failings, but nonetheless, as I said, he still stands. To me, he is the person who has been the subject of all of these attacks of unreason. But whichever side wins, neither the other side won't accept it. They will see another cause for more conflict in future, and I think it'll only get worse.
Is this how historically, speaking and looking at the situation historically speaking, is this how empires usually die out? Is it usually a social decay? And I bring that up because obviously the U.S. military is the most powerful military in the world, but it seems that it's designed to fight a different kind of war. It seems that it's focused on all the wrong types of deployments and the wrong types of conflicts.
Yes.
And it seems that even in the military, for the first time this past couple of weeks, we started to see the first cracks forming amongst the upper ranks of the military as to whether they support the government or not. Specifically, Mattis, for example, is I think the most obvious example of this.
Colin Powell also.
Colin Powell, exactly, recently. So, looking at, you're a trained historian. Is this how empires usually die, with the social decay? In other words,
yes.
There's no social cohesion anymore. But on the same side of that coin, you also have a military that, even though it's powerful, doesn't seem to be positioned properly in today's world, doesn't seem to have the right type of fighting structure to tackle the challenges
absolutely
that are demanded today.
I would agree. I would say, and this is, having read extensively history, societies, empires fall not when they are unable any longer to find answers to their problems, but when they're not even able to understand that they have problems, that they're not able to formulate the right questions to which they can find the answers. Because that's what we're doing. We're no longer able to really look at what are the real problems in the United States? What are the real problems of the military in the United States? The US military, as you absolutely rightly say, is no longer structured, it seems to me, to really deal with the kind of challenges that the United States faces anymore. There are underlying and growing problems within the structure of the US economy, unrelated, by the way, to the pandemic crisis. I want to make that clear. The US economy, with a bit of tweaking, could be sorted out. It isn't being sorted out because people are not able any longer to formulate even the right understanding of its underlying problems. That's when empires fall. That's when people lose the ability, and by the way, the will, because will is very much a part of this, the will to keep going, to actually sit down and look for ways out. And it seems to me that we are in that kind of situation now. I have to say, this has been a very depressing and difficult summer.
Yeah, to say the least.
To say the least.
To say the least. What would you say is the linchpin that's going to push the West to the point of no return?
Well, it is. One always has to look at the United States. It seems to me that we have a situation in the United States where the abilities to conduct a dialogue within US society are fracturing, where the conflicts are now becoming so much out of control and so entrenched that it is no longer possible for the political system to work. And I come back to what I've often said in our programs: the Constitution is no longer being observed properly. I mean, that it seems to me essential, because without the Constitution being observed, without the law being followed, it is very, very difficult for a society that considers itself to be democratic to function anymore. So if it can't function, you will get paralysis. Any system of paralysis, any political system which becomes paralyzed loses its ability to operate. And then at that stage, all sorts of other morbid symptoms start to float up, and then you get a situation where the United States faces an economic crisis. It no longer knows what to do, or is able to form a decision about how to deal with it. It loses the ability to conduct wars. It loses the ability to conduct politics, and then you get a systems collapse. That, by the way, is what happened with the Soviet Union. I mean, the Soviet Union found itself in the 1980s in exactly that kind of situation. Soviet Union on paper had all the things it needed to pull itself together, but it had lost the ability to pose the proper questions to which it needed the answers, to which it could find the answers, because ideologically and politically and systemically, even doing that was too much anymore.
And when it unraveled very quickly.
It unraveled very quickly, and there was no stopping it. And how that works in a country like the United States, I don't know. I don't want to see. I will be very upset if it happens. I still hope it won't. But frankly, this summer has been deeply depressing.
Last question, very quickly. Would it be
these last 3 years have been very depressing?
Yeah, it's been very depressing. That's where I want to focus the last question.
No.
Would it be a stretch to say, not discounting, all the damage that Clinton's, Bush did to the U.S. and the world? Would it not be a stretch to say that this madness was essentially triggered by Obama and Hillary Clinton, specifically Hillary Clinton, when she lit the flames of the Russiagate?
Yes.
Conspiracy, Trump is a Putin puppet. That's when the madness that was it, the dam broke.
I mean, if I may say, there were problems accumulating for a very long time, and a lot of them, in my opinion, had their seeds in the Clinton administration, which I really do think was a very, very dark time. But the actual proximate cause was Hillary Clinton's refusal to accept that Donald Trump won the election and won it fairly and constitutionally. She couldn't bring herself to accept that. The Democratic Party couldn't accept that. The people who were arrayed around her and the Democratic Party and in the media couldn't accept it. The people within the bureaucracy, the intelligence community, the FBI, they wouldn't accept it either. They began on an extra unconstitutional campaign to reverse the constitutional victory of the man who was elected US president. And the moment that happened, the moment the institutions of the United States turned against the US Constitution, the whole situation began in the United States to spiral out of control. And that's what we're seeing now. We're seeing a situation, as I said, when it's becoming impossible any longer to conduct a genuine dialogue about the real problems of the United States, because instead of those problems, we're having to deal with fictions all the time.
Yeah, and the unintended consequence is that the political has spilled over into the social.
Absolutely. Well, that has also been evolving for a very long time now, but it's now become completely out of control again. Again, we are not able to conduct simple discussions about these issues because they are so many of them are taboo subjects for some people, and absolutist positions that people take others, and of course it's invaded politics. It has completely invaded politics, so that, to give an example, both in the Kavanagh case and in the present situation that we're dealing with, the presumption of innocence, fundamental to our system of law, no longer applies. I mean, Chauvin may be a terrible person. He may be a terrible policeman. He may have done terrible things. What kind of trial can he have now?
Yeah. Kavanaugh was a case in point as well. That was quite a saga that the United States went through, wasn't it, with Kavanaugh?
Absolutely. But, how can there be a proper legal process in this kind of situation that we have at the moment?
Yeah. All right, we'll leave it there. I mean, I don't know what else to say about what's going on.
Well. I mean, always one should never, give up completely. I mean, there's always a possibility. And the United States, in truth, has found its way back. I mean, it's been through some very dark times in its past, and it's always managed to pull itself out of them. But this time, I have to say, I'm finding it very difficult to understand this, because I'm finding it very difficult to understand many of the issues that are being played out at the moment. I mean, to me, they're not even issues. That's what I find so difficult about them.
Yeah, and I think the most difficult part is this has really become a religion in and of itself, a cult, and you just can't reason with this cult and everyone is submitting to it. Everyone, the companies, big tech, mayors, governors, politicians, they're literally, and I mean literally, figuratively, and literally taking a knee.
Absolutely. I mean, completely so. But I mean, just consider also the complete illogic of all of this. I mean, these are so-called revolutionaries who want us all to vote for Joe Biden. I mean, why does that make any kind of sense? I don't think it makes any kind of sense at all. And that's what the unreasoning nature of this whole thing ultimately is. As I said, we've lost any sense of reality. As you said, it does have a cultic quality, but then cults are basically a form of unreason in themselves, and that's what we see. But as I said, the United States has pulled through. It has enormous reserves of resilience. The American people do care about their constitution. We shall see.
Yeah, I agree. I think there's definitely a divide, and it's not you could say it's a geographical divide.
No, I don't think it's a geographical.
West Coast, middle, but I think it's more of a city rural divide. That's just my take on it. You have these big city centers, which are just boiling, and then you have, the rest of the U.S., which are maybe small to medium towns, which are kind of looking on, going,
yes,
this is madness. I'm gonna get a gun. I'm gonna protect myself, but this is madness.
Well, I think this is probably true. I mean, I don't have the knowledge of the political geography of the United States that a person who's lived there does. But I certainly don't think it's a mere geographical divide. I think that would be a complete misunderstanding of this process. There is a demographic divide. There is an age-related divide. Certainly, there are real issues. I mean, again, I want to make it very clear. Police violence, I'm absolutely prepared to accept, is a serious issue. Police violence directed against ethnic minorities, absolutely. Black people, absolutely. This isn't the way to deal with them. It wasn't the way, if I could say this again, that the leaders of the civil rights movement in the United States sought to deal with them. They didn't approach these problems in the way that we're seeing now. They would not have gone around, to storm the Seattle, the office in Seattle of the person who supports them. I mean, this doesn't make any kind of sense anymore. And we have all of these rituals now that are being played out because they are rituals. And when politics is reduced to a kind of ritual level, that is in itself disturbing, because rituals have nothing to do with politics. At least rituals are irrational in and of themselves.
Yeah, I think that's the big difference. That is the big difference.
Mm.
Today's movement is its own ritual, its own
Absolutely.
religion, its
Mm.
own ideology, and it is a
Yeah.
bizarre one. It is a nutty one.
Very
But the
odd.
civil rights movement was rooted in traditional religion, was rooted in Christianity.
Mm.
Some of it you could say was rooted in Islam as well. If you
Absolutely.
look at Malcolm X. So it was rooted in religion. It was rooted in America and believing and trusting in America.
Mm.
There wasn't a self-hate of the country that there is in what's going on now.
If you're talking about, Martin Luther King, he actually was wanting to fulfill what he saw as the promise of American democracy. That was what he was all about. He was trying to complete, if you like, the American democratic project. And of course, part of that was the liberation within the United States and its structures of its people. Other people in the United States at that time had different views within the, what we now refer to as the civil rights movement. But the fact is, they were all grounded in fact. They were all looking at the realities of the society that it was, and they were trying to find solutions to it. I don't find this has any solutions. It is a retreat into rituals and theatre, and frankly, that isn't rational. Ultimately, it's destructive. It doesn't take you anywhere. It doesn't take you anywhere positive. It leads you backwards.
And it's also a retreat into money and reallocation of resources.
Well, of course.
I can just throw that in there.
It is.
Of course, there's a lot of people making money out of this.
Well, of course they are, absolutely, and of course there's also, and there is no question about this. There are people behind the scenes who are manipulating this process very much for their own very specific political objectives.
Absolutely. All right, we'll leave it there.
Yeah.
Alexander Mercurs, thank you very much. Take care, guys.